Hello and welcome. Today we have a special guest. I haven't seen Dr. Magda Havas for a few years. I think we met about 7 years ago in Chicago when she was giving a presentation at a medical conference about electromagnetic stress. And I was just totally fascinated by the subject because years ago when I was in clinical practice, I had a patient probably about maybe 17, 18 years ago that came to me with a complaint that she was sensitive to electromagnetic stress and radiation and kind of wasn't sure exactly whether she was a psychiatric patient or not. So I kind of delved into it and she helped me, as most patients educate their kind of health providers. She mentioned to me that really nobody paid attention to this issue until I believe it was the Prime Minister of Norway who had an issue with that sensitivity as well, and she kind of helped put it on the map. So years later, I met with Dr. Magda Havas, who is an educator, a lecturer, professor emeritus from University of Toronto and Trent. And she knows everything about 5G and EMF and everything you wanted to know, but were afraid to ask or were just not interested. So I think it's a very important subject for us, at least to discuss and to educate. So please welcome Dr. Magda Havas.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. What I wanted to ask you, I understand from your background that you started actually doing research on acid rain, as it was called later, in 1970s. So you know the subject of environmental pollution, environmental impact, not only on our environment, but also on health as well. So why is EMF, electromagnetic stress or radiation, why is it important to us?
Well, it's vitally important because so much of our technology relies on the use of electricity, the use of radio frequencies to transmit information. Right now, there's been an incredible explosion of technology like cell phones, smart meters, Wi-Fi, you name it, and it's in most homes. And what people don't realize is that these technologies are emitting radio frequency and microwave radiation. And we've learned that this radiation can be harmful if you're exposed to it long enough and at high enough intensity. So because of that ubiquitous exposure, and because of the rollout of 5G that's going to make things even worse, I think it's important, it's absolutely critical for people to educate themselves on what some of the risks are so that if they want to protect themselves, they can.
Right, and for those of us that are on Zoom calls like this one, and now that we have had a wonderful experience of being locked down in our homes under almost house arrest, the only way kind of to communicate, or has been for the last little while, was through the internet. So wouldn't a higher speed internet be beneficial to all of us, or are there dangers to this?
Oh, well, it would definitely be beneficial in terms of the speed with which we would communicate. But then you've got to look at what the costs are. So you have to do a cost benefit analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And what scientists have been learning for the past 50 years, if not longer, is that the radiation to which we are exposed is unnatural and it's affecting our bodies in a number of different ways. And those ways include things like cancer, they include reproductive problems, and they include a lot of neurological disorders that we classify as electrical sensitivity. So if you're willing to tolerate those health consequences, then by all means go ahead and use the technology and have the faster download speeds. Most people value their health, and so this is not an option for them, not a road they want to go down.
Mm-hmm. So how does it exactly affect us?
Well, we're electromagnetic beings to begin with. All of our nerves, our brain waves, our heart are conducted through electricity in our body. And if you then take an external source of this electromagnetic energy and introduce it to the person, you're going to interfere with some of those internal communication mechanisms in our body. And it manifests itself in a number of different ways. One of the things it does is it increases the permeability of the blood-brain barrier. And as you know, this is a very critical barrier to prevent toxins from getting into our brain and causing things like Alzheimer's and other neurological problems. And so by increasing increasing the permeability, you're actually getting things going into your brain that shouldn't be there in the first place. So that's one of the effects it has. It affects our stress proteins. Dr. Martin Blank did a lot of research on this, and we have stress proteins in our body that are basically saying this is harmful, and so I have to deal with it. They're called heat shock proteins because heat can initiate them. But it turns out that exposure to electromagnetic energy, even at non-thermal levels, turns on the heat shock protein. So your body's saying, oh my God, I'm under a lot of stress. It affects your heart. We've done studies looking at heart rate variability, and we found that some individuals are sensitive to this radiation, and their heart goes into either arrhythmia or tachycardia. So they, develop a very rapid heart rate. And we've done studies with the blood. It causes rouleau formation in the blood. It causes free radical damage as well. And so basically it's affecting every single organ in your body to some extent. And when your body can no longer maintain homeostasis, it can't keep itself in balance, that's when we begin to go down the slope of chronic illness.
I see. So what's the danger? Is it Wi-Fi? Is it the wires, the towers, the cell towers, or is it just a combination of all these things?
It's a combination of everything. We didn't have cell phones prior to the 80s, so that became popular. Most people bought their first cell phone in the 1990s as the size of it came down and the price came down.
Right.
We then had introduction to Wi-Fi in schools. Wi-Fi was really limited to a few labs around the world, military and educational areas. Now we have it everywhere in the home and the school. Smart meters came on board about 2005. So here's another source of radio frequency radiation that's constantly exposing anyone in your home to the radiation. So we've been incrementally increasing our exposure. And when you get to a certain level, the body can't function anymore, and that's when this person falls off. This person might fall off a lot earlier. So we have some people who are basically early warning detectors telling us this is harmful because, like the patient you mentioned in your introduction, became ill, and she was probably extremely sensitive, and because of that we could learn a lot by listening to them and trying to figure out how to help them.
Mm-hmm. I think, if I remember correctly, you mentioned that possibly 30% of the population is susceptible and maybe 10% are extremely susceptible or literally suffering from this. Is that correct?
That's right. We don't know what those numbers are exactly. The numbers I use are about 3 to 5% for very sensitive individuals, and I actually think that might be an underestimate now. That was based on research that's about 10 years old. And because we're using so much more technology, more people are falling into that extremely sensitive group. And then another 35% on top of that are moderately sensitive, which means they can go to work, they can do the normal things that they do, and they come home, they're exhausted, they have headaches, they have chronic pain, they can't sleep at night. So these people are also suffering, but they very often attribute it to aging. You know, I'm getting older and this is normal. Well, it isn't normal, because if you take those individuals and put them in an electromagnetically clean environment, which we've done time and time again, a lot of their symptoms just disappear, they vanish overnight. And if they were truly getting older and that was what was causing their symptoms, that wouldn't happen.
As happened to me personally years ago, I understand that many of these people go and try and seek help, and very few physicians actually are versed in kind of diagnosing this properly, because it could be a cofactor, a kind of coexisting condition. So what are people, how can they find whether they are susceptible? What can they do?
Well, there's a number of things they can do that are really simple and won't cost them anything. So if you turn off the electricity to your house, and make sure it's on for your fridge and freezer, but turn it, just go down to the breaker wherever that is in your home, turn everything off except those two appliances, and go to bed that night and see if your sleep changes, and do that for a couple of nights in a row. And if you find that you're waking up more refreshed, or you're able to get a better night's sleep, that would be one indication that you're electrically hypersensitive. Other things that you can do is, after you use your cell phone or any device, monitor how you feel before and after. And if you feel that you're not feeling quite as well after using something, then chances are that that whatever that technology is adversely affecting your health. The problem is, however, that a lot of the technology we have, people who have a cordless phone in their home, for example, people who leave Wi-Fi on all the time, even when they're not using the technology, they're being exposed to the radiation. So simply turning it off, unplugging it, whatever it takes to get rid of the radiation would be very important. And that's another thing people can do, is simply unplug everything that has wireless technology associated with it, and see if you feel any better with that unplugged.
I guess this is a good advice, and people should be experimenting with something like this. But what happened to people who live in condominiums or in apartments, or even in my home? I know we just recently moved to a new place, and as I'm setting up my internet and my Wi-Fi and all that, I realized that I'm completely surrounded by hundreds of devices that obviously are going to be affecting me as well. Is that correct?
It is. And unfortunately, if you live in a multi-unit dwelling, or if your home is very close to a neighbor's home, you are going to have their technology, their radiation trespassing into your environment. And in this particular case, if most of the radiation is coming external to where you're living, there are products that are now available, because they're in demand, to shield your environment. So there are things that you can do to minimize your exposure if the exposure is coming external to your home. So if you happen to live near a cell tower, for example, or if you have neighbors who have Wi-Fi and you're picking up their signals, there's paint you can buy. It's called Y-Shield paint. It has a very high carbon content, and it absorbs the radiation, which is what you want it to do. It's black because of the carbon, but you can paint over top of it, so you don't have to live in a black environment. There's wallpaper that you can buy. I think last time I saw it in the Netherlands, it was available in the Netherlands, and you can wallpaper a room with this shield on it so that it minimizes your exposure. You can put film on your windows that once again reduces the amount coming in through the windows. And for people who have triple E glass, which was designed for thermal insulation, it turns out this is very effective at shielding about 90% of the microwave radiation as well. So it has a dual purpose. You can buy fabric that consists of silver fibers with copper wrapped around the silver, so it feels like cotton. I said copper, didn't I? I meant cotton wrapped around the silver. And it just feels like regular cotton, and you can use them for curtains. You can use them to put around your bed as a canopy. So there's a lot of things that you can do to minimize your exposure. However, they all have to be done very carefully and usually with the help of someone who's knowledgeable, because if you apply the technology incorrectly, you can actually increase your exposure. So one of the things I highly recommend for people to do is to buy a small, inexpensive radio frequency meter and find out what they're exposed to. And then if they use any of these products, for example, if you put a canopy around your bed, you have to put it around the sides, the top, and the bottom, right? So you're inside a Faraday cage, and then you take your meter inside that canopy and measure it. It should be very, very low. If it isn't, it means there's a hole in the canopy somewhere where the radiation is coming in and then bouncing around. So you have to be very careful on how you use these products as well.
Now, where do you get them?
You can get them at Safe Living Technologies in Canada, and their website is slt.co.
slt.co?
CO, not com, but CO.
Okay.
And they have meters that you can buy. They have products. They're really, really knowledgeable, and they can even send out people to do monitoring for you across Canada.
That's great. Thank you. I know you have published and have done studies on the connection between EMF and heart disease, autoimmune, nervous system, autonomic nervous system, diabetes, MS. You mentioned that. What about children? Are children more susceptible to this than adults? Or?
Very much so, for a number of reasons. If you hold a cell phone up to your head, the radiation penetrates a certain distance and then it begins to fall down. So, it's penetrating all the way through, so you can hold a cell phone here and take a meter and measure it. But it's not penetrating as deeply because your head is simply larger, and distance makes a big difference. When a child does that, their head is much smaller, and so you can have that penetration go much more deeply into the brain. What we're finding is that there are certain brain tumors, gliomas, for example, that are developing. If they develop on the surface, near the surface of your brain, they can be operated on with much less damage. If they appear in the center of your brain, then it's a different story. So that alone is really important. The other factor is that children have an underdeveloped immune system. And the stronger your immune system, the longer it's able to combat any kind of foreign energy, chemicals, biological organisms, and protect you. But with them, they're not as developed, and because of that, they're simply responding much more severely. The third point is that they're growing very quickly. They have various age spurts. And when an adult develops cancer, most cancers are slow growing. When a child develops cancer, that cancer becomes very rapid growing. So we want to, protect children above anyone else. They're our future, and unfortunately, they're the ones who are going to have the greatest lifetime exposure because of, they're starting right at birth or pre-birth even, whereas you and I, weren't exposed to this technology until quite recently.
So you feel that it's cumulative?
Oh, very much so. The longer you're exposed, the worse it's likely to be. So anything that you can do to minimize your exposure. So for example, one of the things they sell at Safe Living Technologies is something called a killer switch. And they put this on in your bedroom, and they put it down at the electrical panel. And when you hit the killer switch, all the electricity in your bedroom is just shut down completely. So you're sleeping in an electromagnetically cleaner environment as a result. And if during the night, which is when we do most of our healing, if you're able to heal during the night, you're able to tolerate it for longer periods. Now, I'm not suggesting that's a good thing to be able to tolerate it, but it's better than having the symptoms.
Right.
Ideally, what you really want to do is minimize your exposure in all the environments. And once again, this is something people can do because we have wired technology. It's not as though you can't get on the internet you can only get on it with Wi-Fi. That's not the case. I have internet access in my home and it's all wired. So I'm not exposed to this radiation. I'm in a relatively clean electromagnetic environment. And anyone can do that apart from people who live in multi-unit dwellings, and there they have to do a little bit extra.
I know many adults, and more so teenagers and even younger children, that are addicted to what we call the screens, right? And of course, they're not wired. It's all on Wi-Fi. Whether at home or at school, anywhere, they're inundated with constantly looking either at their phone or an iPad or some other device. And because it's the programming and everything else is so addictive, it's so in your face, it's so intrusive, it's very difficult as a parent to say no, because they see that obviously as punishment. Try and explain that there's some electromagnetic radiation and all that to a 5-year-old. They're looking at you. They already know you have two heads. Now they are convinced. So any advice you can give to younger parents?
Yes, most definitely. There's a website called electromagnetic-sensitive-society.com. And there they provide information to parents on how to wire the tablet that your child is using, how to wire the cell phone your child is using or that you're using. The technology exists now, and all you do is have a little adapter that you hook up in your home. You can use it anywhere in your home, but you don't have to do it wirelessly. So it can actually be done through wires. And if you go to that website, they have detailed information, including a little video on how to actually make the connections and then live in an electromagnetically cleaner environment because there's less RF radiation going through the air. It's being put onto the wire where it's a little bit more, you're able to tolerate it that much better.
I see. I recently had an email from you about 5G and the petition. I sent it to others, and I obviously encourage other people to send it as well. What's going on with 5G? Why is it being rolled out so aggressively? And what's the danger?
Well, I think the reason 5G is being rolled out so aggressively is that the telecom industry is not satisfied with the income they're getting. They need to constantly grow, which is unfortunately an unsustainable mentality from an ecological perspective. And so it's really money that's forcing this on us. The telecom industry has infiltrated government. In the United States, the Federal Communication Commission is responsible for licensing the industry, and the head of the FCC is a previous lawyer that worked for Verizon. Mm-hmm. The former head of that agency was someone who was responsible for the telecommunication industry as a lobbyist. So you can see that there are people now in positions of authority who are really very much trying to promote the technology, both inside government and outside government. And the same is true here in Canada. We haven't been able to get Health Canada to re-examine their guidelines in a meaningful way based on the science because they're in the pocket of industry. And I hate to say that, but I can't see any other reason why they would fail to do their job. When it comes to 5G, it's not simply a small improvement in terms of speed. It's a massive improvement in terms of speed. And when you have instantaneous communication, then you can bring technology online that you couldn't otherwise. So the driverless car is something that people are trying to promote. And there you have to have sensors all around the car. You have to have sensors in the environment. So once these driverless cars, if they ever do make it on the road, people won't be able to drive because they'll be so sick. So they will need a driverless car to get them around. Mentally, they'll be unstable. We know that it affects cognitive abilities, your memory, your ability to think clearly. It affects your mood. People are becoming depressed and anxious. So there are a lot of ways that this is affecting the human being. With 5G, there are four different technologies that are going to be involved. One is satellite link, and Elon Musk is putting thousands of satellites into space. We have something called, these are large cell macro towers that are going to have lots of antennas on them. We will then have small cell antennas, which are going to be in front of every third or fifth home, depending on how closely you are. And then there's part of it is fiber. So the safest part is fiber. The one we're most concerned about at the moment, and that might change as we learn more about the technology, but the one we're most concerned about are the small cells that are going to be in front of your house or your neighbor's house, and they're going to be irradiating you. And it's something that you won't be able to avoid. As soon as you step outside your house, you're going to be irradiated. There are 3 different frequency bands they're using as well. 2 of the frequency bands we've been exposed to previously, we know they're harmful. The 3rd frequency band is called millimeter waves. They've never been tested for long-term exposure. And these are the frequencies that a lot of scientists are concerned about because there's no long-term testing. So with Elon Musk putting up, literally thousands of satellites into space that are going to beam the radiation back to space without any testing of how it affects humans and plants and animals is so irresponsible. It's difficult for me to comprehend that any government would provide them with that authority to do something like that.
So what can we do? They're putting these towers. What can an individual do?
Well, I wish I knew. People are writing petitions and appeals. They're trying to get the government to listen. Unfortunately, the government isn't listening. What we really need is a moratorium on 5G until we can get some studies done that shows that it's not harmful, which is unlikely to happen. And I think that's the reason the industry didn't do any testing of this nature, because they didn't want to find a problem. If they found a problem, they'd have to report it, and ultimately be responsible for it. So I think that's the primary reason they haven't done any testing. What's interesting is that insurance companies are not insuring the telecom providers for health effects. So if you use a cell phone and you develop a brain tumor and it's linked to your cell phone, they can't get health insurance to basically pay you for that damage. They're going to have to absorb it themselves. And so what they're asking for in the United States is the inability for people to sue them if they're damaged by the radiation. And if they didn't think that was necessary, then they wouldn't do it. So obviously there are going to be a lot of lawsuits coming down the road. So we can fight it legally, we can fight it through our government, who unfortunately is not paying too much attention to this in a proper way. And we can fight it as individuals in the sense of, doing peaceful demonstrations, raising awareness, educating people, just sharing this information. There are far more of us than them. And if we simply refuse to buy 5G technology, there's ways of getting back at the telecom industry financially. And all of these things would have to happen simultaneously in order to even make a slight dent in our future exposure, in our current exposure.
Is this just a North American kind of initiative, or do we have the same thing in Europe? I realize that probably China has been building 5G towers and technology all over the place. So is this global or just kind of more local issue?
No, it's definitely global. Um, we've done some testing to see, where is 5G being rolled out, how much radio frequency radiation are there in different communities, how many cell towers, that sort of thing. And there's a huge cluster in North America, particularly along the East Coast, where you have high dense populations, like New York, for example, where they have the, terrible COVID-19 response. It's very prevalent in Europe, European countries, in parts of Asia, in Australia, New Zealand, less so in South America, although there are hotspots there, and less so in Africa. In Africa, many of the countries don't even have reliable electricity, and that's same for some countries in South America. And so they can't have reliable internet if there's no reliable electricity. And so there are a few pockets on the planet where there's much less exposure, but it's not because they don't want it, it's because they haven't got the infrastructure for it sufficiently built up.
So if we are moving, and it looks like we are moving in the direction of self-driving cars and more things coming down the pipe in terms of downloads and movies, and as you mentioned, probably new technologies are going to be introduced because of this ability to transmit information back and forth at much higher speeds. Um, is there a way to kind of to escape this other than just maybe moving out of kind of densely populated areas and moving to certain spots in South America or in Africa and just isolating yourself there?
Well, we have a lot of places in Canada that won't have very much technology, but they're pretty remote, as you
Right.
can imagine. There's going to be less that we can do, even moving out of a city, which I think a lot of people are now beginning to think of. They're beginning to look for land that they can build on or something that exists in the middle of a forest. So, if anything, they're moving back to nature because they realize that nature can be protective of them. And they're trying to move away from their neighbors. So, even though we're social creatures, the more people you have around you, the more technology you have around you, and so the more you're going to be exposed. When it comes to 5G, unfortunately, because of the satellites, we're going to have the entire globe blanketed with this radiation. And so even going into the country may not be sufficient unless you go far enough away from populations and the satellites aren't actually pointing at certain regions to irradiate and provide the technology. There's something else that's very disturbing, and that is part of the government sells the electromagnetic spectrum to the telecom industry. So they have to pay a license to use it so that there's no interference. So you're sold a certain frequency band. And there's a frequency band that's going to be free. So no one has to pay for it. And it's about 60 gigahertz in frequency. And it turns out this particular frequency band is absorbed by oxygen. And if you have an oxygen molecule that's absorbing radiation, it's going to affect it in some way. It's going to increase its energy, and so it'll wobble or something will happen to it. And there are some people who claim, and I haven't been able to verify this, so this is just a hypothesis, that when the oxygen absorbs the 60 gigahertz, it won't be able to provide oxygen, bind to your hemoglobin and provide oxygen to your cells. And if that's the case, then this particular frequency can be weaponized very, very easily. And there have been people stating that in Wuhan, where the outbreak occurred, that they already had 60 gigahertz frequencies. And on the Princess cruise lines, they had 60 gigahertz frequencies for Wi-Fi. So they're going to be using that frequency for global Wi-Fi access. And if that's the case, and if that's making it more, the virus more dangerous, then simply providing 5G everywhere, the next time we have a viral outbreak, which they're predicting will be in the fall, people in high 5G environments are the ones who are going to be suffering the most, if that relationship is correct. And it obviously has to be tested to see if it is.
Well, one consolation I have is that so far, every prediction and every metric when it comes to the recent pandemic, um, every single metric has been wrong. So that's the only consolation that I can take away from this. But um, it doesn't look like we as a society are going to move away from this technology. Uh, I think that we're really all kind of addicted to it in some ways. And there's obviously some positive, very positive things that are going on. We have access to information, we have access to communication and everything else. So, but where do you see, let's say, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what would be an ideal solution to this? As you said, there's a cost benefit analysis. I realized that we're not just going to drop our cell phones. I don't think it's going to happen. I think that the way the industry is structured, as you said, it's based on growth, unlimited potential, unlimited growth, and people buy into it, whether we like it or not. People do buy into it. What would be a perfect kind of balance from your point of view, and what can I do as an individual to try and protect my health and my family?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm not even recommending that people get rid of their cell phones. I don't think that's reasonable.
Right.
We didn't get rid of cars because they killed people or, we had traffic accidents. So, but we made them as safe as we possibly could. We have speed limits, we have seat belts, we have airbags. So, really the aim is to make this technology as safe as possible. That has to be regulated by the government. The government is not regulating it. The only time you need wireless technology, the only time you need wireless technology is for mobile devices, right? Like your cell phone. So
Yeah.
that can't function with a cord. Your computer at home can function with a cord. Your smart meter doesn't need to be wireless. That should definitely be wired. So there's technology that has to be wireless, and that's the only thing that should be wireless. Everything else should be wired. And if we did that, the levels of radiation would drop immensely, absolutely immensely. We have to use more fiber optics than we're using right now. And if anything, fiber is faster than the current technology we have. It's more secure, it's safer, it's harder to break into. So we just have to go more into that fiber, which in my mind is another wired type of technology. Mm-hmm. If we did that, we'd reduce our exposure immensely. People's health would recover, and fewer people would, start going over that dip of sensitivity. And that is my recommendation, that we monitor our environment, find out what we're exposed to in your home, find out everything that you're exposed to, that you're contributing to, convert it into wired technology, reduce your exposure, talk to your neighbors, try to convince them of doing the same thing. And if you can't, then you can shield your home and, live in a lower EMF environment. If you don't reduce your exposure, eventually most people are going to develop some adverse health effect from it. I can't guarantee it as a scientist, but the probability is extremely high that people are going to become sick. Once they become sick, they're not going to contribute as much to our economy, in terms of working, taking care of their kids. So our health is vitally important. When kids become sick, they can't learn. They can't function properly. So if we care about future generations, then we have to minimize everyone's exposure. And the best way to do it is with a meter, inexpensive meters that I can recommend to you, and you can put them on your website and where they can buy them. And that way, I think you can then begin to teach yourself about this, share it with your family and friends, and really minimize your exposure. Now, there are other things you can do as well. So, for example, one of the key concerns is the increase in free radicals in your body. That's been documented over and over again. Free radicals cause all sorts of damage, from inflammation to heart problems, everything. And so taking antioxidants can help enormously. And I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm not going to, recommend anything like that. You'd have to check with your healthcare provider, but things like vitamin C, CoQ10, zinc are very beneficial. And people who have become electrically hypersensitive can regain some of their health by increasing their antioxidant levels in their body. Living a healthy lifestyle otherwise is really important. Going out in nature, grounding yourself, hugging a tree, believe it or not, can get rid of the excess electrons on your body. Walking along a beach barefoot in the sand can ground you. So going back to nature, living a healthier lifestyle, minimizing your wireless exposure are all things every single one of us can do and should be doing if we value our health.
That's good advice. What about people that are suffering and have not been kind of diagnosed? Because I don't even know if anyone can truly diagnose the sensitivity. Where do they go? Where do they get help?
Actually, we do have doctors that are diagnosing electrical hypersensitivity around the world, including here in Canada.
Mhm.
Women's College Hospital has been one of the early places where they do that. They look at environmental health and people with multiple chemical sensitivity and electro hypersensitivity. They do an assessment, they measure various blood and urine parameters, and they can diagnose you with the illness. There's a really quick diagnostic that I think works about 90% of the time. All you have to do is ask a person, do you like fluorescent light bulbs? One question. No, I'm serious. One question. And 90% of people who are electrically hypersensitive say, I can't tolerate them. They give me a headache. My skin
Hmm,
crawls. Um, People who aren't sensitive to them say, oh, they're okay. Like, they don't have a reaction to them. They might not like the color, but that's not what I'm referring to.
I see.
So, of all the people that I've interacted with who are electrically hypersensitive, 9% of them, if not more, can't tolerate these energy efficient light bulbs. And that's now happening from some LEDs as well. So that one question can actually determine whether you're likely to be sensitive or not. The more symptoms you have of electrical hypersensitivity obviously begins to push you over on that side.
Right.
There are a number of precursors as well that people who have become electrically hypersensitive have experienced certain trauma in their life. So, for example, whiplash or concussion, any damage to your central nervous system can put you in that electrosensitive category. If you have a lot of mercury in your body or other forms of, chemical toxins that are neurotoxins, chances are you're going to become more electrically hypersensitive over time. If you have a really high biological load of yeast or bacteria or viruses, that can put you over as well. And if you've then been exposed to electrosmog for a long time, or you've been shocked, you receive multiple shocks in your living environment, that can put you over. And finally, having a weak immune system for whatever reason can make you more sensitive. So those 5 things are really critical. And depending on which of those 5 you have, if you have excess mercury in your body, detoxing with the mercury is going to help you. If you have a very high parasite load, getting rid of those parasites is going to help you. So doctors have to realize that these are some of the co-factors that are making
Right.
people electrically hypersensitive.
Yeah, so-called pre-existing conditions or existing conditions, and obviously this just exacerbates the symptoms and just messes them up because it kind of changes the clinical presentations. That's what
Yes.
I meant to say. Um, what about education? I mean, I know, we can talk about this probably till the end of the day or if not longer, but um, where would you advise people to go to do their own research, to educate themselves, to find out their own information, and also to empower themselves to educate others? Because, you know, uh, my frustration, and probably yours as well, it's just not too many people, even if they are aware of it, it kind of out of out of out of sight, out of mind. But
Mm.
I think it's an important issue. Where would you suggest people go to to find reliable information?
Well, there's quite a few different places. There's the Environmental Health Trust in the United States. It's very good. They keep up-to-date information on this. I have a website, magdahavas.com. The Electromagnetic Sensitivity Society, the Electromagnetic Sensitive Society, gosh, I better check that out before I give it to you, just to make sure I get it right. That's another site that's very, very effective. And Joel Moskowitz has a site in California that is extremely good. So if you look up Joel Moskowitz or any of the other sites I've mentioned to you, they provide excellent information. There's the Canadians for Safe Technology that is providing information, and there are now sister groups around Canada calling, Ontarians for Safe Technology, or different groups that are really beginning to form to share this information with other people. And reliable information is absolutely critical if we want to move forward with something like this.
Great. Listen, I can't thank you enough. It's been, as always, very informative. We spoke over a few years here and there, and every time I talk to you, I get more and more ideas. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing. And you've been doing it for a while, and I know you're very passionate about this. And thank you. And I hope that you continue to be active. And now you mentioned that you have actively retired. I don't know what kind of new things, new projects you have in mind, because I have a sense and a feeling that you're probably going to be more active than when you were officially working somewhere. Is that true?
That is true, and I'm still keeping very busy. If anything, I have more time to do the things that I really enjoy doing.
That's
So I love retirement. I highly recommend it.
well, I remember an episode from Borat. Are you retired or no? I'm retarded. There's a big difference between the two.
That's
On
right.
that happy note, stay safe. Thank you once again, and we'll be in touch. Maybe you can, if you don't mind, maybe you can email me a couple of these sites that you mentioned, and I'll put them up for people to link up as well. That be okay?
I will, and I'll send you some links to documents as well that are particularly beneficial for the health community to look at on how to diagnose someone with electrical sensitivity.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All the best. Take
Bye.
care.